This is the headstone of John Belinsky. In 1908, John was arrested for building a stone wall in the middle of the road in downtown Easton, Connecticut. Apparently, he was trying to keep all the strangers out of town. John is number 451. This is the final resting place of Norman Burton, who chopped off his own hand with an axe way back in 1866. As the Bible says, "If thy hand offend thee, cut it off and cast it from thee." Norman is number 21. This headstone is for John Brazzi, who once called the fire department back in 1916 because he thought his boss's barn had been lit on fire. But it was just the moon. So John went up to his room and lit his bed on fire instead. And that little incident earned him a spot as number 760. Those are just three of the literally hundreds of patients interned here at the Connecticut Valley Hospital Cemetery in Middletown, Connecticut. Back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, this is where the Middletown Hospital for the Insane, as it used to be called, would bury their dead. This is where those who died under the care of the asylum were laid to rest. So at this point, I'm sure the main thing you're wondering is, what's up with the numbers, right? Like, why are there no names on any of these stones? No dates, no inscriptions, nothing. Literally just a number. Well, allow me to explain with the help of number 189, a.k.a. Mr. Michael Brugge. See, back when Michael died in 1894, he had no family and no friends and no anyone who wanted to come and claim his body. So the hospital just kind of stuck him in the ground right here instead, with a burial number instead of a name. A grave with no identity. The only reason we know for sure that this is Michael is because the asylum's burial records were eventually publicized long after the cemetery was closed up in 1957. And so, what we have here are those who were left behind, quite literally abandoned in death. You know, cast off to history without a name or a story or anything. Just their identity literally stripped away from them. And a lot of the time, that was by design, too. A huge motivator for the numbering system was to protect the patient's family from the stigma of having a relative buried at an asylum cemetery. So, in short, you add all this together, and these are all people who were meant to be forgotten. Which is why today, I want to remember a few of them. Yeah, I did some digging, and I found a whole bunch of interesting little stories and tidbits and newspaper articles and all sorts of stuff about a few of these long-forgotten patients. And I want to share them with you today. So please, sit back, relax, and let's put some names to these numbers. All right, so right out of the gate, I should warn you that this asylum actually had a pretty sizable criminal wing, meaning that several of these stories are gonna kind of be on the gruesome side. Like, case in point, number 364, aka Lorena Alexander, the main character of one of the wildest stories of crime and murder to ever fade away from the public consciousness. The simple facts of this case are that Lorena Alexander and her partner / lover / roommate, a guy named Frank Bassett, they poisoned a homeless man named Stuttering Jack to death with chloroform back in 1878, and then stuffed his body into a barrel, and then threw the barrel onto the back of a wagon, and then drove the barrel all the way up from their home in Bridgeport, Connecticut, to the Yale University Medical School because they had heard that a doctor there was offering to pay $25 for dead human bodies so that he could use them for research, which is quite a mouthful of a murder, right? The doctor, unsurprisingly, did not want anything to do with the body, partially because there was no death certificate, and also because it was literally a dead guy shoved into a barrel. So Lorena and Frank, they just decided to cut their losses, and they hucked the barrel into a random ditch off the side of the road on their way back to Bridgeport, and then they went on home like nothing ever happened. And then fast forward a couple months, and now Lorena and Frank are both sitting in jail cells for the murder of Stuttering Jack, and newspapers all over the country are writing articles and drawing these crazy pictures of the crime. And police are trying to investigate the murder, but they're kind of having a hard time because they're hearing very different stories from the two suspects. Frank Bassett is telling the cops that Lorena killed the guy all on her own and that he had no idea she was going to do it, and that she bullied him into helping her take the barrel to Yale and all that kind of stuff, right? Like, he's basically trying to say that Lorena was the mastermind and that he was just coerced into everything. The cops really did not believe him, though, partially because Lorena was kind of like a small and thin middle-aged woman who probably could not have held chloroform to a guy's face long enough to kill him all on her own, let alone shove the dude's body into a barrel by herself, right? But what was even more damaging than that was the fact that Frank Bassett had actually bought the chloroform himself a couple days before the killing. And he tried to tell the cops that he had bought the chloroform to clean a suit, but obviously they weren't going to believe that. So Frank had a hard time talking his way out of this one. And then Lorena had an even harder time trying to distance herself from the crime. She tried to say that Frank had actually killed the guy all on his own, and that Frank had shoved the body into the barrel, and that Frank had threatened to kill her if she didn't help with the murder and the transportation, and that it was all Frank. Frank did it. She's just a victim. And the police, they sat and they listened to Lorena and they heard her say all that. And then they had a few questions. Okay, Lorena, you say that you had no idea that Frank was going to do this. But how come you went up to that doctor in Yale by yourself a few days before the murder and told the doctor to get ready because you were going to reap a harvest of dead bodies for him? And then how come the doctor also says that you offered to rob some graves for him, and that also that you tried to sell your own body to him for $25 in advance of you actually dying? And while we're at it, Lorena, how come this pharmacist says that you tried to buy arsenic from him, but he wouldn't give it to you because you were acting super shady about it? Oh, and also, while we're on the subject, how come we found this book in your pocket where you're like keeping super detailed notes on the movements of various men who lived around you? And also, what's this other book that we found in your pocket that's literally called A Treatise on Poison? So in the end, the general consensus from the police was that both Frank and Lorena were pretty much complicit in the crime, and so they were both put on trial for murder. Frank tried one last total Hail Mary where he hired a psychic who said that Lorena had actually killed a bunch of other people besides the guy they put in the barrel, but that didn't work either, and eventually both Frank and Lorena were sentenced to life in prison. Oh yeah, and one more little tidbit that I forgot to mention when I was at the cemetery. Frank and Lorena also tried to claim that they did not kill Stuttering Jack, and instead somebody else killed him in a fight in front of their house and then threw the body over the fence. So they just found the dead body and put it in the barrel and tried to go sell it. Frank Bassett eventually died in prison as literally the oldest lifer in the Connecticut prison system. He lived all the way to 1937, so almost 50 years spent in prison. And by the time he died, he was pretty much completely debilitated mentally. He would just wander up and down the halls of the prison, talking about how he was actually walking through the tundra of Siberia. And he even spent a few months at the Middletown Asylum, but he didn't die here, which is why he doesn't have a grave in this cemetery. Lorena, on the other hand, did die here, of course. She was transferred to the asylum in the fall of 1902, and from what I've read, she actually was not too difficult of a patient. She even knitted gifts every once in a while, like little pen blotters and rags and things that she would send to both the defense attorney and also the prosecutors in her case. As far as I can tell, she was doing this as far out as 12 years after she was first convicted. And now she's just here, number 364. Pretty wild that a story that incredible and that widespread and well-known at the time is now just completely hidden away by a nondescript stone with a meaningless number on it, right? And I know it might be a little bit difficult to feel too sorry for someone like Lorena having her identity hidden away to history, but I do want to be clear before we get too deep into this video that a lot of the people here were just, somebody that genuinely needed help and then got stuck with an intentionally dehumanizing headstone because of it. Like, take Emma Boyden here, number 532, for example. Emma died in the asylum in the fall of 1913, just a few weeks after first being committed to the institution. She was 60 years old when she died. But because she spent less than 1% of her life at the asylum, she's 532 forever. Less than a few weeks before her death, she had her own address and everything, but nope, sorry. You're 532 now. Nothing we can do. See you later. And if you want an even more striking example, then let's talk number 406, Lillian Burr. In 1903, Lillian came screaming into the Meriden, Connecticut police station with a wild story about 4 guys that had supposedly abducted her in a car and then drove her around and drugged her and robbed her. And the police could only ever find one suspect who even admitted to knowing Lillian. But then when they brought the guy in, Lillian said that this dude was a perfect gentleman who was her friend because he gave her the wink. But that didn't stop her from switching her story and accusing him again the second he left the station. And then eventually Lillian's behavior just started to get more and more erratic, and she began to break into song and cry at seemingly random moments. And sometimes she'd even get violent in the police station. And all of that behavior eventually led to her getting sent away to the asylum at Middletown. And while she was at the asylum, her husband very quickly divorced her, and her parents refused to do anything to help her, and that is why she is number 406. At best, Lillian was just a woman suffering from some kind of delusion, right? She genuinely needed help. And at worst, she actually was attacked and assaulted, and she was telling the truth. Are either of those things really worthy of being completely hidden away from history, of being absolutely abandoned by all those who are supposed to love and remember you, of being stripped of everything, even your name? I really don't think so, Lillian. But hey, not everybody buried in the cemetery is quite so easy to lend sympathy to. Take John Anderson here, for example, number 39. An evil, malicious man, according to those who knew him. John was extremely prone to taking everything as an insult. He was constantly ready to fight over the smallest little imagined slight, and he was always talking about how he was more than willing to kill if he had to. And in his mind, he had to in March of 1874. Because of a completely imagined conspiracy against him, John showed up at the factory that he worked at one day with a couple of pistols, and he just started shooting. And he wounded a whole bunch of men, and he killed one, and then he turned the pistol on himself, and everybody thought the mayhem was over for a moment, and then John seemingly sprung back to life and did some more shooting, and then ran outside and cut his own throat, screamed to the world that it was time to watch him die, and collapsed right there in the street. But he didn't die. John survived his self-inflicted injuries, and he showed up to court a few days later with a bullet still lodged in his head, and then he promptly tore a wooden arm off of a chair in the courtroom and threatened to kill everybody around him with it. Unsurprisingly, Anderson was judged by the court to be insane, and he was sentenced to live out the rest of his days at the Middletown Asylum, where he was quite the problem patient from what I've read. Like, I found a whole bunch of articles talking about him like barricading himself in his room and smuggling away knives and attacking the staff with the knives. And one time a reporter actually got to talk with John for a moment, and John told them that he was beginning to think that he was going to have to kill someone at the asylum, because that seemed to him like the only way out of the institution was to be convicted of another murder and then get sentenced to death this time. Visitors were not allowed to talk to John anymore after that. Interestingly, though, John actually did escape the asylum once in 1882, which had everyone freaking out for a while because John, prior to being locked up, told everybody he swore that he was going to get revenge on everyone who was responsible for sending him to the asylum. And then when they went into his room after he escaped, they also actually found a note left in the room saying that he was going to kill everyone who came after him. But he actually just got caught in New Jersey without too much of an incident, and that's how he ended up back here, number 39. Another pretty out there character to just be hidden away under a rock with a number on it, right? Another pretty interesting little tidbit here is that John is far from the only patient to ever escape from the asylum. Like, I found a ton of other records of patients escaping. Like John Billings, number 758, escaped in 1897. Owen Burgess, number 26, disappeared from the asylum for a while, leading some to speculate that he was a wild man who had been spotted recently around town. Catherine E. Bruce, number 767, escaped in 1900. And poor John Brazzi, that guy who was trying to build the wall in the middle of downtown Easton, he died in 1918, drowned while trying to escape the asylum. All of these people were either recaptured or died during the escape attempt, and that's why they're back here in the cemetery. All right, here's a kind of crazy one. Over here, we got William Hahn, number 1262. And this is number 894, Samuel Bobrowicz, I think. William killed his mom with a meat cleaver, and Samuel shot his landlord to death over $10. And both were eventually convicted and committed to the Middletown Asylum for their crimes. The real story, though, happened while both were patients together in the institution. Apparently, one day after dinner, Sam started freaking out and threatening everyone with a chair, so William took the chair away from him and cracked him in the ribs with it and killed him, dead, just like that. Which is kind of crazy to think about, right? We got a killer and their victim buried together in the same cemetery, both completely stripped of their identity. No way anybody would ever know. All right, next up, how about we do a few more little rapid-fire blasts through a couple burials? Like Catherine Burns, number 621, walked into a river in 1888. Someone rescued her and drug her out of the river, and then she just walked on away like nothing ever happened. Thomas Burke, number 446, found wandering around a church at 2:30 in the morning causing a ruckus. When the police asked Thomas what he was doing, he said that 3 ghosts had appeared to him on a nearby train platform and led him to the church. Augusta Brown, number 937, committed because she wouldn't stop going to the police, talking about how her son had been murdered and that her boss owed her $10,000. This is another one where, for all we know, she was telling the truth. Number 651, Edgar Barney, threatened to beat a woman over the head with a gun and then threatened to attack her family with an axe and then ended up here at the asylum because of it. Guy J. Brewster, number 151, burned down his uncle's barn. All right, so I got one last grave to tell you about here, but before I do, I kind of wanted to point something out first. See, some of you might have noticed that almost every single person that we've talked about in this video has a last name that either starts with A or B. And that is because I've been researching all these patients alphabetically. And by the time I got to the end of the B's, I realized that I already had a pretty long video lined up just with that. So if you want to see more of this and you want me to keep on looking through the C's and D's and you want to hear more of the stories locked away in the cemetery, then write me a comment and let me know, because I will absolutely come back and do more of this if people want to see it. All right, time for our final gravestone. And this one is going to be just a little bit different than all the others. Let me introduce you to William Bigham, number 973. Bigham was a patient at the Middletown Hospital for the Insane. And that is all you're ever supposed to know about him, right? Like, that is all they ever wanted anybody to ever know about him again when they assigned him this plot and this number. He is 973. That is all he is. His entire life, his being, his hopes, his dreams, even his name, everything he ever did and was, it all got replaced with a number. All you get to know is that this man was a patient at the asylum. No, not even this man. This person was a patient at the asylum. But did you know that this person also found a two-headed snake in 1905? Yeah, here's the newspaper article. William Bigham finds a two-headed snake and he kills it. Now, I don't want to speak for William here or anything, but if it were me in his position, I would way rather be remembered for finding a two-headed snake as opposed to dying in an asylum and then intentionally being forgotten. So, thank you very much for watching. And please join me in remembering the Hercules of the Connecticut River Valley. I'll see you next time.